Hello, and thank you for choosing this clean historical Western romance from author Indiana Wake. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. Welcome to the Carter Sisters series, a sweet and inspirational romance series where courage is tested, faith is strengthened, and love finds a way. Copyright Indiana Wake. Only for Love by Indiana Wake. Chapter 1. Are you heading off to church again? Victoria called at Constance from the sitting room. Yes, I'm going to Bible study, Constance said, having been diverted from the kitchen to answer her sister. Victoria was sitting on the couch contentedly with Ellie sleeping on one side of her and Jess sleeping on the other. Those babies sure do sleep a lot. Constance smiled as she looked down at the children. And they look like such little angels. Well, they are angels, aren't they? I think so, Victoria said. And they're not the only ones. And she gave her sister a pointed glance. You surely don't think I'm an angel too, Constance said and screwed her face up with embarrassment. I'm not a baby anymore. No, I know you're not a baby, Victoria said. But I do remember holding you in my arms when you were. I wish I could remember it, Constance said. Though I do remember you looking after me when I was a little older. I suppose that's when we begin to form memories. Yes, I suppose so. And I know you're not a baby now, Constance. You're a young woman and a very beautiful one. Victoria, stop it. You know I don't like to hear things like that, Constance said, and seemed to turn rigid. I'm sorry, but it's true. You are very beautiful and I wish you wouldn't cringe when I said it. Really, why can't you just be pleased to get a nice compliment? Victoria laughed. Because I might come to depend on such things. And what sort of person would I be then? Not a very good one, Constance said firmly. I don't know the Bible as well as you do, honey, but I'm quite certain that it doesn't say anything about it being wrong to accept a compliment. Maybe not, but there's plenty of references towards vanity, and that's the same thing. No, it is not the same thing, Victoria said, shaking her head from side to side. In fact, accepting a compliment might be considered gratitude. Well, gratitude is a good thing, Constance said, staring off across the sitting room, her eyebrows drawn down tight as she tried to get her mind around such a concept. Well, thank you for your compliment. She smiled and turned to leave the room. Wait a minute, Victoria said, clearly not keen to let her little sister go just yet. Yes, what is it? Constance smiled. I just wonder if there isn't something else you could be doing with your time. Surely you can't have any objection to me going to church, Victoria? Really, you go yourself every Sunday. Constance felt strangely emotional but would never, ever have been able to explain it. I don't have any objections at all to you going to church. I think I just wish that you had something else to do as well. You seem to be there an awful lot. Well, I like to be there. I like to be there especially when it's quiet, when there's nobody else much there. It's so peaceful and I feel that I am able to think more clearly and pray without distractions. I understand that, really I do, Victoria said gently. But isn't there something you'd like to add to it? Maybe you could find some friends in Murray Plains? By friends, do you mean a husband? Constance asked, feeling a little panicked. Goodness no, Victoria said, holding her hands out in front of her. Really, Constance, that's not what I meant at all. I meant friends. Real friends. You're young yet, you don't need to be thinking about marriage unless you want to. I'm not sure I'll ever want to get married. I think I would like to give my life to God, Constance said a little fearfully as she waited for her sister's response. Constance had felt that way ever since their father had left them. She had received so much solace in God's house in the darkest of days that she wanted to do anything she could to repay him. Surely that couldn't involve marriage. Marriage was a risk. She risked that awful feeling of loss if she ever committed herself to another person. How do you mean? I don't know yet, exactly. But I know that I want to do something to give back to God and the church everything that I've been given. But you do so much already, Constance. You're always collecting for the needy and spending your time sitting with the sick and reading to them. How could you possibly doubt that you're giving back? I don't doubt that I am, Victoria. I just want to do more. And if I do all the things you want me to do, have friends and even a husband one day, then I won't be able to do what I want to do anymore. I won't be able to keep giving because I will have to devote my life to somebody else. And that would be just one person when I could be spending my days helping so many more. Constance had never spoken to Victoria of her true wants and had to admit to herself that she felt somewhat relieved to have finally been able to say the words aloud. I understand what you're saying, Victoria said. Seeing that she was being taken seriously, Constance felt even more relieved. I'm so sorry, I just worry that you might be lonely. Especially now that Jillian has set up home with Cliff. But she's only set up home in that little house they built on the ranch lands. Constance said, starting to laugh. I think I see more of Jillian now than I used to before. We can see her place from the kitchen window. Oh, stop teasing me, Victoria said as she laughed and shook her head. You know that I worry about you and you know that I always will. That's just what big sisters do. And it's what mamas do too, Victoria. Don't forget, I don't remember anything about our mama. As far as I'm concerned, that role was fulfilled by you. And now you're going to make me cry. Victoria was already dabbing the corners of her eyes. Just so you don't have to answer any more questions. Don't think I don't know your game, Constance Carter, Victoria said, laughing and crying all at once. But it worked, didn't it? Constance said and grinned. Look, I really do have to go or I'll be late. All right, you see that you make it back before it starts getting dark. I will, Constance said, and turned to leave. Chapter 2. Constance had been disappointed that nobody but her had turned up to the little church on the edge of Murray Plains for Bible study. It seemed to her that the numbers had dwindled steadily for some time and she couldn't understand why it was that folks just couldn't commit to something so simple. Does that answer your question, Constance? Pastor Elliott Harrington pushed his spectacles back up the bridge of his nose and smiled at her. Yes, Pastor Elliott. I've tried to get to the bottom of it for a long time but just couldn't. Sometimes I think it's just the language. I guess sometimes it's just a little bit too advanced for me. For the most part, Constance, the Bible is written in a language which is just a little bit too advanced for us all, he said with a smile. You mustn't think you are the only one who struggles with its meaning from time to time. Well, thank you. I really am glad that I'll be leaving here tonight with a greater understanding than I came in with. She smiled at him broadly and noted with interest that he seemed suddenly a little awkward. Is something wrong, Pastor Elliott? No, there's nothing wrong at all. Thank you, Constance, he said, and began to rise from his seat. Perhaps you'd like some tea? He smiled at her awkwardly. Yes, but I should make it, she said, not wanting to be waited on. Constance, you always take the lion's share of the work, whatever it is. Just stay seated and I'll make you some tea. I'm not above such things, you know. He turned away from her and busied himself preparing a pan of water to put on the stove. In the weeks since the Bible study classes had dwindled to the point they had now reached, Pastor Elliott had moved the small group from the church to sit around his kitchen table at the back of the church. It was a good deal warmer there and everybody had been pleased with the arrangement. The kitchen was small and neat, and it was clear, just watching him setting the water to boil, that Pastor Elliott did a good deal for himself. While there was a housekeeper who came in and looked after him to a degree, Constance thought that he probably took a certain amount of pride in looking after his own needs for most of the time. "Well, thank you," Constance said. "You're welcome," he said, quickly looking over his shoulder at her, smiling before turning back again. Things had not always been that way between them, and Constance began to wonder quite what had changed for Pastor Elliott Harrington. He had taken over at the church just prior to her father losing everything at the card tables. Constance had always been a regular attendee at the church but had found herself becoming ever more involved in helping where she could after her father left. It gave her a reason to be in the church, a place in which she felt calm and where her fears seemed to melt away. And Pastor Elliott had been a tremendous strength to her. He was not very much older than Constance herself, at perhaps 24 or 25, and he always looked so young when he was giving the sermon on a Sunday. Constance had liked him immediately, and, when trouble struck her family shortly after he had appeared in Murray Plains, she felt she had been able to speak to him far more easily than had he been a very much older pastor with a great many years more experience. However, of late, it struck Constance that Elliott was a little reserved in her company. He often opened his mouth to speak and then closed it again and looked away. Many were the times she had racked her brains for any hint of something that she might have said which would have offended him. "How are you finding things at the ranch now that Jillian has gone?" he asked suddenly, snapping her back into the here and now. "Now, that's strange, Pastor Elliott," Constance said as she studied the small vase of flowers on the scrubbed wooden table. "What's strange?" "My sister asked me the same thing as I was leaving to come here," Constance said. "She asked me if I was lonely since Jillian went." "And are you?" "I don't think so." Constance shrugged her shoulders. "I always have something to do, you see." "It's true that you spend a good deal of time here." Pastor Elliott nodded. "I just hope that you don't feel you have to." "No, I never feel pressed to come here," Constance said truthfully and watched him as he stood with his back to her pouring boiling water into the teapot. Elliott Harrington was tall and broad and, were it not for his clothes, he very likely wouldn't have looked like a man of the cloth at all. He was straight-backed and had dark brown hair which seemed to go this way and that, no matter how much he tried to keep it neat. And he had a dark beard also, which was mercifully a good deal neater than his hair. The beard made him look just a little older, and Constance often wondered if that was why he kept it. Perhaps he thought his parishioners would take him more seriously if he didn't look quite so young and fresh. But of course, if you ever did feel lonely and in need of company, you may come here as often as you choose. You need not make any arrangement beforehand, you know that. "Yes, Pastor Elliott." "And thank you," Constance said, feeling warmed to hear that she would always be welcome there. "And God's house is such a wonderful place to assuage loneliness, if it ever does creep in," she went on. "We can never be alone here, can we?" "No, that is very true," he said, putting the teapot down in the center of the table and turning away from her again to pick up the cups and saucers. "And of course, I am always here." There seemed to be some meaning in his words, although Constance wasn't entirely sure what that was. "I know," she said brightly. "Thank you." Chapter 3. "Why don't you come on in, Elliott?" Victoria smiled brightly and opened the door wide to him. Elliott always felt comfortable in Victoria's company and had always liked the entire Carter family. Ever since he had arrived in Murray Plains as a young and brand new pastor, Victoria and her sisters had always made him feel very welcome. Their father, on the other hand, was quite a different case altogether, and he had often wondered how it was that so rough and selfish a man had produced such fine daughters. He had not been at the church in Murray Plains for long when a gossiping parishioner had, quite literally, given him chapter and verse on all the problems which had suddenly stricken those warm and friendly young women. The very idea that their father had gambled away the roof above their heads and then left them to manage alone was something he often thought unforgivable. Even being a pastor as he was, even preaching forgiveness from the pulpit every Sunday, Elliott wondered if God himself could forgive such a thing. Of course, he knew that he could, and realized that his own inability to see how such a forgiveness could be given meant that he still had a lot to learn in this world. Well, that was simply life, and Elliott would do what he could to overcome his judgment. "Thank you, Mrs. Masters." Elliott smiled and walked into the fragrant kitchen. It seemed to him that Victoria Masters was always baking something, and the kitchen, whenever he had been fortunate enough to cross the threshold, always had a sweet smell to it, as if there were perpetually a cake cooking in the range. "Victoria, please," she said, and smiled at him. "Victoria," he said, and sat down in the chair she had indicated with a sweep of her hand. "Constance won't be a moment. I'm afraid Reed has her out there collecting eggs. He's recently got himself some chickens, you see, and he's obsessed with egg collection at the moment." Victoria laughed. "Well, it is a good thing to be self-sufficient," Elliott said, and laughed with her. "I must say, Constance is very good with the chickens. They seem to trust her, and they don't make any complaint when she takes their eggs. I'm afraid I can't say the same for me. I only have to walk into the barn and they all start squawking at me." Victoria laughed. "We all have our talents, Victoria. I think I can smell yours currently. Is that sponge cake?" "Yes. My husband is never happy unless there's a bit of sponge cake to be had, and, as a consequence, I seem to be constantly baking them. Reed is a lucky man." Elliott laughed. "And I'm sure he realizes it." "Oh, here she comes now," Victoria said, looking out the window and smiling as Constance approached. Suddenly, Elliott's ease of manner left him, and he felt the familiar awkwardness start to take him over. Why on earth was it that he couldn't simply behave with Constance as he behaved with Victoria? Of course, he knew the answer to that better than anybody on earth. Quite when he had first fallen in love with Constance, he couldn't really say. It seemed to be something that had crept up on him slowly and quietly without him even noticing it. He had always liked her and had wondered at her quiet strength in the worst of times. He supposed that that was the thing that he had first begun to admire, and that everything else, her beauty, her grace, and her love of God, had been qualities he had found afterward. And, in the end, perhaps it was all those things, all mixed together beautifully, which had made him fall for her so very hard. "Oh," Elliott said, rising to his feet awkwardly the moment Constance bounded into the kitchen carrying the eggs. "Pastor Elliott," Constance said brightly. "Forgive me, I really did mean to be ready." She held the eggs out as if they were an explanation in themselves. "Not at all, Constance," he said, and paused to clear his throat. "You seem to have done very well." He nodded at the basket. "Well, I suppose the chickens did most of the hard work." Constance chuckled. "Oh, Constance, you are funny," Victoria said. "Now, do the two of you at least have a few minutes to spare before you go, to sit down at the table and have a slice of this cake?" "Do we?" Constance asked, turning her round blue eyes on him in a way which rendered Elliott mute for a few moments. Of the 5 Carter girls, Constance was the only one with truly fair hair. It was golden and shone like the sun, and her large eyes were a very pale blue. When he had first met her, Elliott had barely paid them any heed at all. But now, after almost 2 years, he could hardly look at Constance's eyes without finding himself painfully distracted. Yes, of course. Elliott turned his attention fully on Victoria, knowing that he would, at least, be able to speak to her in a sensible manner. It certainly does smell like a wonderful cake. So, what are the two of you doing this evening? Victoria asked as they sat down, and she was busy cutting the cake. We're collecting for the needy, Elliott said, glad for a subject upon which he could talk without faltering. Yes, tonight it's food. We have several collections to make in Murray Plains, Constance added helpfully. Yes, I think we have a good deal to collect tonight. The people of this town truly are so very kind. It is a good thing that I have cleared out the back of the cart to make room for it all, Elliott went on. Sooner or later I think we'll need a bigger cart, Constance said, and looked at him across the table, her large blue eyes holding his own for a moment. He smiled and nodded, almost unable to speak. As she talked about needing a bigger cart, all he could think of was that the two of them would very soon be sitting side by side in the driver's seat, their shoulders almost touching, as they set off for Murray Plains. Chapter 4. I hope you don't mind me driving you down to the church, Constance. Reed said amiably some weeks later as the two of them sat side by side on the cart. Not at all, Reed, Constance said. I'm very grateful to you. Well, your sister doesn't like the idea of you coming back in the dark. Fall is nearly over and winter will soon be here, and she's not keen for you to be out on your own in the evenings. No, and she's always looked out for me, Constance said. She thinks of everything. She sure does, Reed said with a laugh. And you're sure you don't mind picking me up again? I mean, isn't it a bit of an inconvenience to you? It's not an inconvenience at all. Reed shook his head and smiled. When her sister had been won by Reed Masters in a card game, Constance struggled with her conscience. She had wanted to look at the whole thing in a good and kind manner, and yet she found that, no matter how she looked at it, she did not like Reed. She thought it disgraceful that he should even accept one of her sisters as a prize, even if he did win the card game. It had taken her a good deal of time to realize that Reed, amongst many other good things that he was a quiet rescuer. He had seen 5 young women in a terrible situation and, in spite of making himself look like a villain in some respects, had silently done everything he could to save them. After all, a cynical man most certainly wouldn't have taken on a woman and all 4 of her sisters, and yet Reed had not even argued at the suggestion. And now, just a year later, Constance knew that she loved him like a brother and was thankful every day that he had come into their lives. Well, I'll only be in there an hour or so. By the time you've reached home again, you'll be turning the horse around and heading back to church. Your sister is bathing the girls tonight. I would probably be better off out of the house and sitting in the cart while that's going on. You know what Jess and Ellie are like with water. He laughed. Yes, I do. Constance laughed too at more than one memory of the adorable 3-year-old girl splashing wildly and shrieking with delight. And you're right, you're probably better off out of the house. As soon as she was inside the church, Constance immediately set about splitting the great armloads of flowers she had into little piles on the long wooden table which ordinarily held the hymn books on Sunday. Good evening, Constance. Pastor Elliott seemed to appear suddenly and she gasped. Good evening, she said with a smile. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. No, you have nothing to be sorry for. I was in a world of my own here. I always am when I'm splitting the flowers. And they smell wonderful. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I must thank you for the great effort you've gone to in collecting them. I hope you know that I don't take your efforts for granted. Pastor Elliott, I would never suspect that, Constance said and laughed happily as she put the first of the long-stemmed flowers into one of the vases she had just cleaned out. Constance, perhaps you could just call me Elliott, he said somewhat cautiously. Elliott? She said, feeling suddenly very unsure. But that wouldn't be right, would it? Many of the people in town call me Elliott. Even your sister doesn't feel the need to address me as pastor. I think I'd like it if you just called me Elliott. For a moment, he looked at her in a way that she found a little unsettling. Elliott Harrington really hadn't held her gaze properly for some time, and it wasn't until he did again that she realized that something truly had changed between them at some point. Why would you prefer me to call you Elliott? She asked, almost fearing his answer. Because I like you very much, Constance. I like you so much that I don't want there to be that sort of barrier between us. You don't need to look up to me. I never wanted that, and now? And now? She asked, feeling her cheeks begin to flush warm. And now more than ever I would like us to be friends. Friends, she said. But I thought we were already friends. Constance, I think you know what I mean. I want to be more than friends. I can't tell you how much you mean to me. He spoke so clearly and frankly that Constance knew he must be speaking the truth. He had been awkward with her for so long, and now she realized why. The pastor had fallen in love with her, or at least was very nearly about to, and that was why he seemed so strange of late. Pastor Elliott, she said awkwardly. I mean, Elliott. I really don't know what to say. And she truly meant that. At that moment, the door to the church swung in rather violently, causing them both to look up. What are you doing here? A young and rather rough-looking man looked at Elliott in the most demanding way. I'm the pastor here, young man. Do you need something? Is there something I can help you with? Elliott said quite sternly. I need you to be gone, the young man said, and was quickly joined by another. I thought you said this place would be empty, the second young man said, his annoyance clear. Look, what is this? Elliott asked and began to walk towards the two young men. Elliott, don't. Constance had a dreadful sense that something awful was about to happen. We're here now, the first young man said to his compatriot before turning back to them. Don't come any closer, he said, aiming his comment directly at Elliott. Stay where you are and no one will get hurt. Hurt? Elliott said, and Constance marveled at how strong and confident his voice sounded. We'll just take what's in the collection box and be on our way, the second man said, hardly looking at Elliott at all. You'll do no such thing. Elliott was suddenly striding towards the collection box as if to protect it. The good people of this town donate their hard-earned money for the upkeep of this church and the assistance of the poor. You will not just walk in here and take it. Really? The second young man said, producing a pistol and aiming it at Elliott. Elliott, please stop, Constance said, so afraid that she was frozen to the spot. You are not going to take the collection box, Elliott said. His voice was still firm and steady and his stride had not broken for a moment. When the shot rang out, Constance felt as if every drop of air in her lungs had been expelled. She stood motionless, her mouth hanging open as she willed herself to take in enough air with which to scream for help. Chapter 5. The men had been so shocked by what they'd done that they simply turned on their heels and ran, not taking the collection box at all. Feeling her senses suddenly come back to her, Constance finally took in a great gulp of air and cried out. Elliott! Elliott, she said, running to his side and dropping down to her knees. "Oh, God, please help us," she wailed as she looked down into his face. His eyes were closed and he looked so serene that he was almost angelic. For an awful moment, Constance thought that he was dead. She felt sick and devastated and sobbed almost uncontrollably as she leaned over him. Then, as she heard him moan, she realized that he wasn't dead at all. "Elliott, please speak to me," she said, but he simply moaned again in response. With shaking fingers, Constance hurriedly opened his long dark coat and could see that his crisp white shirt was stained with blood. She knew she must open his shirt and look at the wound. She had the most dreadful feeling that the bullet had pierced his heart. However, although his smooth skin was covered with blood, she was quickly able to see the bullet wound. With relief, she thought it perhaps a little low on his body to have gone through his heart, and yet, at the same time, she knew his life was not guaranteed. "Just hold on, Elliott, please." She leaned over and whispered into his ear. "I'm just going to get some help. I'll be right back, I promise. I won't leave you." And with that, she rose to standing and dashed out of the church. She looked down at herself as she ran from the church and could see that her cornflower blue dress was covered in blood. If she had that much blood on her clothes, how much had Elliott already lost? She screamed again when she collided with somebody and was about to yell for help when she realized that she had run into the arms of her brother-in-law. "Dear God, what's happened? Constance, are you hurt?" Reed Masters asked, his face ashen and his eyes wide with shock. "No, but some robbers came into the church and one of them shot Elliott. He's so badly hurt, Reed. I don't even know if he'll live." "Right, let's go to him," Reed said, grasping her hand and running back into the church with her. It seemed to Constance to take forever for them to get Elliott down the pathway from the church and into the back of Reed's cart. Elliott was a big man and extraordinarily heavy, and she couldn't help but think that they had hurt him even further, dragging him, pushing him, and squeezing him into the back of the small cart. "Come on, Constance. Climb up here," Reed said hurriedly. "No, I'm staying with him." "Ride off, Reed." "I'll be all right in the back here," she said, and crouched down at Elliott's side in the back of the cart. She did what she could to make him comfortable, but he was simply just too heavy. She couldn't move him this way or that and, in the end, could do nothing more than hold his face in her bloodied hands and tell him that everything would be all right. On the short and bumpy ride across town to the doctor's office, Constance Carter had never prayed so hard in her life. Chapter 6. "Oh, Victoria, I'm so glad you're here." Constance, her face tear-stained and her hands and clothes still covered in dried blood, ran into her sister's arms. Reed had not wanted to leave her there alone, but, at the same time, hadn't wanted Victoria to stay at home and worry where her husband and sister had got to. I'm sorry," Constance said, suddenly drawing away from her sister as she realized that she might spoil Victoria's clothes with all the blood. "No, I don't care about that," Victoria said, and pulled her roughly back into her arms and squeezed her tightly. "All I care about in this world is that you are all right." And Victoria dissolved into tears. "I'm all right, I promise." "You promised me that those men didn't hurt you," Victoria said, determined to have every reassurance that Constance hadn't been touched in any way. "They didn't come near me. They didn't even really come near Elliott. The cowards shot him from the doorway and then ran. They didn't even get the collection box that they had come in there for." Constance could hardly speak for sobs. If only Elliott had just let them have it. "You might not want to hear this, honey, but that isn't the sort of man Elliott is. He isn't the sort of man who would be bowed down in the face of violence. But I can't help but wish that he was. Just for a minute, Constance said, and began to cry so hard that Victoria led her to one of the waiting room chairs. "Here, you must sit down, honey," Victoria said, and sat down at her side, putting a protective arm around her shoulders. "Where are Ellie and Jess?" Constance asked, suddenly preoccupied with the welfare of her nieces. "You don't need to worry about them," Victoria said warmly and kissed the top of her head. Reed scooped them up and ran them over to Jillian. "They're quite safe. I just wish the doctor would come out. He's been in there for so long I can't help thinking that Elliott's dead." "Don't think like that, Constance. You just hold on to hope. Elliott's big and strong, and if he made it this far, there's no reason why he can't keep going now." "Just before it happened," Constance said, and then trailed off. "What? What is it?" "Just before those awful men came into the church, Elliott was speaking to me about something important," Constance said, wondering if she really ought to be telling Victoria what he had said to her. "And what was he talking about?" "He asked me to call him Elliott," Constance said shyly. "Is that all?" Victoria smiled. "No. I said that I didn't think it was right, but he said that he liked me and he wanted me to call him by his first name." "Is that so bad?" Victoria went on. "I don't know. I suppose I was just a bit surprised." "Are you really surprised that Elliott likes you?" "No, not really, but I think he meant that he more than likes me," Constance said, and looked down at the dried blood on her fingers. "And you didn't know?" Victoria spoke so gently that Constance was reminded of being a little girl with her big sister looking after her. "No, I didn't." "Well, I knew," Victoria said, and laughed lightly. "No, you didn't," Constance said, thinking that Victoria was simply trying to make her laugh and feel a little better. "Constance, I knew," Victoria said firmly. "Nobody hearing how that poor man stuttered every time he saw you could think anything other. I thought he'd always been like that." "No, I remember a time when he was perfectly sensible in your company," Victoria said with a sigh. "And it was probably in the time before he'd fallen in love with you." "Do you really think that Pastor Elliott is in love with me?" Constance asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "Yes, I do." Victoria smiled. "I wish he wasn't," Constance said. "I wish things could just go back to normal, when he just thought of me as one of his parishioners. And I wish he hadn't been shot. Oh, God, what if he dies?" "Wait, here comes the doctor," Victoria said, and squeezed her hand tight. "Ladies," the doctor said as he came out of his treatment room and walked, sweaty and blood-stained, into the waiting room. "How is he?" Victoria asked when it seemed that Constance would be unable to speak. "He's holding his own," the doctor said, and smiled. "He's a real strong one, that's for sure." "Doctor, is he going to live?" Constance finally spoke. "Yes, he's in a bad way and is going to need a good deal of time to recover, but he's going to make it." Before the doctor had even finished speaking, Constance had launched herself across the room and flung her arms about his neck. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You saved his life." "Well, he wouldn't have a life to save if you hadn't got him here so quickly. So, I think we can share the accolades there, young lady." The doctor gave her a pat and, looking somewhat awkward, managed to extricate himself from Constance's fierce grasp. "So, what can we do?" Victoria queried, gathering Constance to her once more. "Well, I believe he lives on his own, doesn't he?" the doctor said, somewhat significantly. "Yes, he does. A housekeeper goes in, but I don't think she goes in every day," Constance said, wanting to help but feeling too shocked and too exhausted to think how she really could. Well, he's going to need proper nursing. He's lost a lot of blood and he is very weak. And, as he starts to improve, there's no telling what infections he might pick up along the way. It's not a good time for him to be on his own. He won't be on his own, Doctor, Victoria said, and Constance almost collapsed in her arms with gratitude. Yes, he can come to us, can't he? Constance said, looking at Victoria hopefully. Yes, of course he can come to us, Victoria said and reached out to touch her face. I will nurse him back to health, Doctor, I promise, Constance said vehemently. Just let us know when he is well enough to be moved, Doctor, and Reed will come and fetch him, Victoria said calmly. Chapter 7. But Victoria, the wound needs cleaning several times a day. You have enough on your hands looking after Ellie and Jess. Why can't I take the dish of water and the cloth and see to him? Constance asked, more than a week later when Elliott Harrington had been discharged into their care. Because it's not really proper, Constance. What do you mean it's not proper? Constance complained. He's my friend and I want to help him. Yes, but you're a young woman and it isn't fitting. How can it not be fitting? You're young too. Thank you, honey, Victoria said and laughed and smiled. But I am 8 years older than you and I'm a married woman. It makes a difference. I don't see why it should make a difference, Constance said. I just want to help him. I want to nurse him back to health, otherwise I'm just sitting here doing nothing. You won't be doing nothing. You'll be looking after the girls for me. I've already told Ellie and Jess that they need to behave themselves for a few weeks. I'm not talking about that. Not talking about what? I love the girls, you know I do. But I want to do something to help Elliott. Well, if you look after the girls so that I may tend to Elliott, then you are helping him, albeit indirectly. But I want to help directly. I owe it to him. Why do you owe it? Victoria asked, her eyebrows raised. I just do. It's hard to explain. Well, try to explain, Victoria said and sat back down at the table, the tin dish of boiled water and a clean white cloth still in her hands. I just feel responsible. I mean, Elliott wasn't really concentrating, was he? When those two men came into the church, Elliott was nervous, wondering what I was going to say to him. You mean when he told you how he felt about you? Victoria asked gently. Yes. But from everything you say to me, Elliott acted in such a calm way. You can't really think that what he said to you beforehand had any effect on the outcome. But I feel bad that I didn't have an answer for him. I hadn't said anything to him. You mean you hadn't told him how you felt? I don't think I do mean that, exactly. You see, I don't think I was going to tell him how I felt. I was just going to tell him that everything was all right and it didn't change anything. Constance, forgive me for butting in, honey, but what do you feel for Elliott? I don't know, Constance said, and it was the absolute truth. Before he had declared his feelings for her, Constance had never thought for a moment that he had seen her in such a way. She had always assumed that their relationship was one of pastor and parishioner, much as he enjoyed with the rest of the town. He had always seemed somewhat set aside, being a man of the cloth and all, and so she had never considered him as anything other than that. However, when she had thought that he might die, Constance realized that her feelings for him were perhaps just a little more complicated than she had ever imagined. And yet, at the same time, she could not declare them to be love because she didn't know if they were simply as the result of fear. Whether she was in love with him or not, Constance thought very highly of Elliott Harrington and had been greatly shocked by the idea that he might die. "I don't know, Victoria. And I still feel too shocked to even think about it. But what I do know for sure, what I do know for absolute definite, is that I want to be the one who looks after him." "Well, you know I can't allow that. Not only for your sake, but for Elliott's also. He cares for you a great deal, and to have you tend him in such a way would just confuse things even further for him. I don't want to upset you, honey, but you're just going to have to understand," Victoria said, and began to rise to her feet. "All right, but will you at least let me go in and speak to him for a moment?" Constance asked, rising to her feet also and looking most determined. "Of course," Victoria said kindly and smiled at her. "How are you feeling?" Constance said the moment she had knocked on the door and entered his room. "I've had better days, Constance, but I'm sure I'll heal in no time. Especially since I'm being cared for so very well." He smiled at her, although she thought he looked most uncomfortable. "Can I rearrange your pillows, Elliott?" she asked shyly. "Yes, thank you," he said, and remained silent as she reached around him to straighten the pillows up. "Did you hear that the 2 men were caught? They will go to jail for a very long time. Not that that is enough punishment. They should hang for what they did." "I'm pleased they have been caught," he said. "I would not want anyone else to be hurt, but the law should be just and kind. It should forgive, as so should we. But an eye for an eye," she said. Elliott smiled. How he loved to discuss such things with her. "You have read the passage where Jesus said, 'But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also.' This is the way I want to live my life. I will let the law carry out what justice it deems fit, but I will not crave for vengeance. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." "You are such a good man," she said. "Much better than me. At times like this I do not feel worthy, for they have made me afraid and angry. Do not be afraid. This is the path that we are on, and it is righteous." Constance nibbled on her lip. "I wish I could do more, that I could see you fit and well and healed. You and your sister have been so kind. Honestly, I don't know how I will ever repay you." Elliott looked pained, as if in want of something else to say. "You don't need to thank us, Elliott. And I have told my sister that I would rather look after you myself. I want to nurse you back to health," she said, and sat down on the little chair at the side of his bed. "I don't think your sister will be too pleased about that, Constance. She's older than you and she's a married woman already. I'm as grateful to you as I am to her. You must not think any different. It's not that. I feel called to do this, to nurse you myself, and so I've come in here to ask you if you will marry me," she said, and watched as his eyes flew wide open. "You want to marry me, Constance?" he asked, tilting his head to one side, clearly incredulous. "Yes, I want to marry you. Then I can look after you properly in the way that I would like." "Constance, just a few days ago if I'd ever thought that you would propose marriage to me, as curious as that is, I would have been the happiest man in the world." "So, you're not happy about it now," she stated simply, wondering if he had decided that he wasn't in love with her anymore. "Not as happy as I'd like to be. You see, I love you, Constance. But I can't marry you simply so that you can nurse me. That isn't right, and it isn't what I want. A marriage of duty is not the life I want for you. But I want to help you." Constance was feeling suddenly a little lost. "I know you want to help me, and I am so grateful. But I can only marry you for love. As painful as it might be to live a life without you, a life with you in a marriage where you cannot feel for me what I feel for you would be wrong for both of us. I'm sorry, Constance. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I won't marry you. Oh, Constance said, rising slowly to her feet. Well, I hope you didn't mind me asking. No, I didn't mind you asking, he said. Yet, Constance thought that she had never heard anybody sound as sad as he did at that moment. Chapter 8. As the days passed, Constance found herself becoming more and more downhearted. She truly wanted to do all she could to help Elliott and felt as if the world was conspiring to see that she couldn't. Had it been a calling? Her purpose under God? If so, she had failed and she did not know what she should do to resolve the feeling inside her. Constance, you look kind of down. Reed walked into the sitting room where Constance had been playing on the rug with Jess and Ellie. The girls had kept her busy all day, never once letting up, not even for a midday nap. Still, they had kept her mind off her own troubling thoughts with their energy and their happy chatter. However, the final game in which Constance had insisted that they run around her as she sat in the middle of the rug had finally done the trick, and the two girls, slowing down bit by bit, had wound down to a stop and each now lay sprawled upon the rug, fast asleep. I hadn't realized it was so late, Constance said, looking at him askance. I should have had a meal ready for you. No, I'm down from the ranch early today. I thought I'd come see if there was anything I could do to help. Oh, Reed, that is nice of you. Constance felt a little lifted at such a kind gesture and managed to smile. Well, I guess I like young Elliott Harrington and they're more than I thought. Reed shrugged and carried on in, taking a seat in one of the armchairs. I guess I kind of admire his spirit, you know? I think anybody else would have died that night, but this man is tough. Yes, he seems to be as strong as an ox, she said, scratching her head as thinking of him now seemed to make her do. And as stubborn as a mule. What makes you say that? Reed raised his eyebrows at her. Well, I asked him if he'd marry me and he said no, Constance said, as if it was the most normal thing on earth. Pardon me? Reed spluttered, almost swallowing his own tongue. You asked Elliott to marry you? Yes. And do you particularly want to marry him? Reed asked, and Constance knew that Victoria must have told him how Pastor Elliott had confessed his feelings. I feel drawn to help him and I want to help him. I want to nurse him back to health. I want to be the one who tends to his wounds, Reed. Why do people not understand that? But marriage goes on a little bit longer than nursing someone over an injury, Reed said kindly. I know that. Constance was on the defense. I know that it's for life. Well, apart from the strangeness of you asking him for his hand in marriage, Reed said and paused to chuckle. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, Constance. You're real funny sometimes, you know. He composed himself a little better. Apart from the strangeness of all that, I reckon Elliott must have had a very good reason to turn you down. A real good reason, because I'm certain that that man loves you. Yes, he said as much. Constance looked up sadly. And he said that he couldn't marry me unless I loved him too. And you don't love him? Reed asked cautiously. To be honest, Reed, I don't really know. I mean, I felt so strongly when he'd been shot and I was so scared. I don't know if that's love or not. And if you want the truth, I never thought that I would ever want to get married. For a long time, I thought I would much prefer to spend my life helping people. Helping people through the church, just like I was helped when our daddy ran out on us. If it hadn't have been for the church and Elliott, I don't think I would have survived. But you know that a sense of obligation isn't the same as wanting to marry someone. I mean, to really marry somebody for life, you need to love them. But you didn't love Victoria when you first married her, Constance said so very quietly. No, but I was certain that I would in no time at all. I didn't say it, but I knew it. Oh, Reed, I really don't know what to do for the best. Constance wrung her hands and looked at him sadly. For that was the truth. She cared so much for Elliott that she wanted to do everything in her power to help him. But she wished she knew if the feeling she felt for him was actually love. Not ordinary love, but the love that a woman feels for a man, real love, grown-up love. There's only one thing you can do, Reed said, and rose to his feet. You have to wait, and that's all. You can't marry a man if you're not sure, especially when there is no need for you to run out and get married. There's always a home for you here, Constance. If you want to devote your life to helping others, this will always be your home while you're doing it. But think about Elliott. Think long and hard because, if you do love him, it will make itself known soon enough. As Reed walked out of the room, he paused long enough to ruffle the top of her golden hair. Chapter 9. Constance had slept more soundly than she had done for some time. Something about Reed's kind words earlier that evening had made her feel at peace for the first time in days. Although he cared for her deeply, Reed was able to be a little more considerate in his approach to her problems of the heart than her sister was. The truth was that Victoria loved her too much and was simply too fiercely protective of her to be able to solve her every problem. But Reed had given her hope that her feelings would make themselves apparent if she simply gave them a chance. She needed to stop thinking about the direction she wanted her life to take. After all, she felt sure that she could continue to help people even if she was married. But then, if she was married, she needed to be sure that it was for love. Elliott deserved nothing less than that. With that thought in her head, Constance had drifted off into a wonderful, peaceful sleep. Her sleep had been so peaceful, in fact, that when the first shout came, it took her some moments to come to. Constance, finally rousing properly, sat up in her bed, her head full of confusion. Had she really heard somebody shout? Constance, Reed, help me. Came the shout, and she instantly recognized the voice as that of her sister. Without a moment's hesitation, Constance freed herself from the bed linens and ran to her sister's aid. What is it, Victoria? Are you hurt? Constance asked, feeling desperate. Victoria? Reed questioned, appearing in the kitchen at the same time. Come quickly, Elliott's taken a turn for the worse. What? Constance gasped in disbelief. Quick, Victoria said and dashed off with Constance and Reed following along in her wake. When she reached the bedroom, it was to find Elliott laying back awkwardly across his pillows fighting for breath. His eyes were wide and his face a horrible ashen color, with his lips somewhat darker than they ought to have been. We need to get him into the cart straight away, Reed said, heaving Elliott up into a sitting position in the hope that he would be able to breathe better. Victoria, run out and hitch up the horse, now, he said, taking control. Constance and I will get him to the door. Victoria ran from the room and Constance looked desperately at Elliott. Oh, Elliott. Please try to breathe. We'll get you to the doctor as soon as we can, she said, tears rolling down her face as she looked at his pained and frightened expression. He couldn't answer her, not even to nod, as he fought for every tiny spoonful of air. Hurry and get dressed, Constance. You'll need to come with me. Victoria will have to stay here with the girls. Without a word, Constance ran off to do as she was told. Reed himself had already pulled his trousers on, despite the fact that he still wore his nightshirt which was tucked raggedly into his waistband. Constance had never dressed faster, and by the time she returned, Victoria had only just shouted that the horse and cart were ready. Once again, it took them an inordinate amount of time to get Elliott into the cart. He really was so very big and strong. However, despite his strength, a lack of oxygen in his body had rendered him almost as weak as if he had been truly unconscious. He was not able to help him at all. When he was finally in the cart, Constance scrambled in after him and knelt at his side. Reed shook the reins and the horse set off immediately. Constance did what she could to keep Elliott upright, knowing that he would be able to take at least a little breath as long as he was sitting straight. He was so weak that he lolled back constantly and, in the end, she had to wrap her arms around his great frame and pull him towards her, almost cradling him in her arms. "Elliott, please keep breathing. Please hold on." As she spoke, she felt him slump forward a little and knew that he was losing consciousness. "Elliott, you have to keep your eyes open. You have to hold on. Please, I love you. I love you so much and I can't live without you." Constance was crying and gasping for breath herself. "Don't you dare die, Elliott Harrington," she cried, and held on to him so tightly it was as if her own life depended on it. By the time they had reached the doctor's office down in Murray Plains, Elliott had slipped into full unconsciousness. The doctor and Reed dragged him out of the cart and carried him between them, coping very much better than she and Reed had managed before. "What is it, doctor?" Constance asked desperately. "Let's get him in and have a look," the doctor said, trying to keep her calm. After several minutes of examining him, the doctor seemed to come to some conclusion. "All right, he's still just about breathing. Listening to his lungs, I would say that they have filled with fluid. He has no doubt had a chest infection and, not being able to cough hard enough to clear any fluid from his chest, what with the pain of the bullet wound, his lungs have slowly filled up and that is preventing him from getting enough air. But can you save him? Is he going to live?" Constance was sobbing hard. "Yes," the doctor said firmly. "But first you need to calm yourself down, Missy, because I'm going to need your help as well as Reed's." "My help? But how? How can we help?" Constance bit down hard, controlling her sobbing instantly. "Reed, hold him up and brace him. Constance, tap his face and get him awake." Immediately, they set about their tasks. "All right, Elliott. I need you to concentrate. This is going to hurt, but you're going to have to do it. I need you to take in as much air as you can. Do it slowly if you have to, but you're going to need to take enough air down so that you can cough." Elliott looked at him a little blankly. "That's right, take it in. Now, when you cough, Elliott, you've got to do it as hard as you can. Never mind that bullet wound, it's healing now. You can't hurt anything, but you have got to cough hard." Elliott sounded like a wounded old bellows as he sucked in the air. The first time it was not enough, the cough was as weak as a child's. "Try again, Elliott, my love, again," Constance whispered into his ear. This time he breathed so hard that they could hear the wind hissing into his lungs, and then he coughed so hard that it shook the whole room. "That's a good start," the doctor said. Elliott and Constance both nodded. It was a good start indeed. Chapter 10. Constance had slept on the bench in the waiting room of the doctor's office. It was hard and uncomfortable, but she was exhausted and she somehow managed to get a few hours' sleep. When the doctor had finally sent them out of the room, Elliott was doing very nicely. He was tired and weak, but, with their help, he had managed to cough every bit of fluid from his lungs. He had undoubtedly been in great pain from the bullet wound as he had done so, but he had approached it as calmly and stoically as he had approached the two young robbers on the day he was shot. Constance began to come to and sat up on the bench, rubbing hard at her eyes. Reed was across the room, fast asleep on the other bench, and she was careful not to make a noise to wake him. Creeping across the room, she silently entered the treatment room and looked in at the doctor. "It's all right, you can come in," he said, and yawned and stretched. "He's sleeping, you can sit with him for a while. In fact, you sit with him and I'll go and get some coffee." The doctor smiled at her and tapped her shoulder. "You did well. Keeping calm must have been hard, but your encouragement got him through this. You helped save his life, honey." And with that, he left the room. Constance walked cautiously up to the side of Elliott's bed. Hardly daring to breathe for fear of waking him, she looked down at his pale face. He really had been through it, and she hadn't realized quite how much she had loved him until she truly thought she was losing him for the second time. "Good morning," he said without even opening his eyes. "Good morning, Elliott," she replied quietly. "I knew it was you," he said, and she could see a faint smile on his lips. "Well, I wasn't going to go home and leave you here." She reached out to run her fingers lightly over his rough, short beard. "Because you love me," he said, and the little smile grew larger. "Yes, I do love you." "How did you know that?" she asked as he opened his eyes and stared at her earnestly. "Because you told me. In the cart on the way over here, I heard you say it." "Goodness me, I'd almost forgotten that I did such a thing. I was so scared, Elliott. I thought you were going to leave me for definite this time. But I didn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave this life if there was the slightest chance that you really do love me." "I do really love you," she said, a little confused. "And you weren't just saying that because you were afraid that I was dying?" "I was very afraid, Elliott, but I knew right there and then that I truly do love you. And I love you too, Constance. I think I've loved you from the first." "So, you'll marry me then?" she asked, and was amazed to realize that he was laughing. "Yes, I will marry you, Constance. But if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you instead." "Oh, yes, if you want to," she said and smiled before leaning gently over him and tenderly kissing him on the lips. Epilogue. "I suppose, at least, she's not going too far," Reed said with a laugh as he slid an arm around Victoria's waist. "Yes, I guess all the girls are pretty close to home, aren't they?" "Yes, they are." Reed pulled her a little closer. "They sure look happy, don't they?" He was looking over to the newly married pastor and his glowing bride. "They look beautiful," Victoria said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Come on now, this is a happy day." Reed gently kissed the top of her head. "And I am happy, Reed, really I am. But I reckon you're a little sad too. After all, Constance is the last of the sisters. You finally did it, Victoria. You managed to see them all married to good men. And as hard as it's been at times, all four of the girls know how much you love them and how hard you've worked to keep them together and to make sure that the men in their lives were good enough for them. It is such a relief to me, honey, to see them so happy. And they really did find good men, didn't they? With a little help from their big sister, yes, they really did," Reed said. "But I guess I'm kind of worried about you now. The house is going to seem real quiet without them." "Not so quiet, Reed. Jess and Ellie certainly keep me busy. They keep everybody busy." He chuckled. "I just don't want you to be sad or feeling lonely." Victoria gave him a big loving smile. "Reed, sweetheart, I don't think I'll have time to wallow in sadness for long. Oh, yes, and why is that? Because as busy as Jess and Ellie keep me, I reckon this little one is going to keep me busier still, she said, and patted her belly. What little one? Reed turned her around to face him. Do you mean? Are you telling me? Yes, Reed. You're going to be a daddy again. I can't believe it, he said, his eyes shining. I can't wait. Suddenly, she was being lifted off her feet and twirled around the room. You're happy then? Victoria asked, smiling at him brightly. Of course, I'm happy, my beautiful wife, he said, continuing to twirl her around so much that she was starting to feel a little dizzy. I love you so much. And I love you too, Reed Masters, Victoria said, blinking back tears of emotion. Well, I reckon you're gonna have to explain it all out again. Look, here come your sisters, all dying to know what we're celebrating. Goodness me, it's like they'd never been away. Now put me down before I'm sick, Victoria said, and dried her eyes before turning her attention to her 4 beloved sisters. Thank you for listening to the final book in author Indiana Wake's The Carter Sisters series. If you enjoyed this series, make sure to listen to Indiana's Brides of Russet's Reach series. Subscribe to Indiana's YouTube channel today and be the first to know when she releases new, free audiobooks.